You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some surprise bad news for one of Donald Trump's closest confidants. Can you explain what just happened in the realm of disbarment now for a Trump ally?
Yeah, Brian, our viewers probably remember Jeffrey Clark. He was I don't want to call him high DOJ official, kind of mid-range DOJ official in, of all things, the Environmental Division, who tried to convince Donald Trump to make him the Attorney General so he could send out letters to the battleground states saying the Department of Justice, in essence, had found significant fraud undermining Joe Biden's election win. Brian, in a very real sense, Jeffrey Clark tried to help Donald Trump steal the 2020 presidential election after all of the people at the Department of Justice, the leadership, the people who actually were involved in the investigation into the election's results had concluded, the Department of Justice had concluded there was no fraud undermining Joe Biden's win. Jeffrey Clark said, I don't care. Make me your Attorney General, Donald Trump, and we'll get it done. Well, guess what? He was referred for an ethics investigation to the D.C. Bar Council because he holds his law license in Washington, D.C. And the component of the bar that conducts these investigations, the Board on Professional Responsibility, just found that he had lied, he had committed unethical conduct, and they recommended he should be disbarred. Boy, and if ever a DOJ official, an attorney, deserves to be disbarred, it's somebody who tried to misuse the power of the Department of Justice to help a candidate who lost the presidential election steal the office of the presidency. Hard to envision a more egregious, unethical, bit of conduct than what Jeffrey Clark is found to have done.
Okay, so Glenn, how does this usually work in terms of the likelihood that somebody will be disbarred if they've been recommended for disbarment in the past?
Yeah, I think the track record, loosely speaking, I don't have exact statistics, is after a thorough investigation and after basically there's been a mini trial. There is a prosecutor of sorts who presents the case in support of, a finding that Clark engaged or any attorney engaged in ethical misconduct. And if he is found to have engaged in misconduct, then they take up a range of punishments. It could be something as simple as a reprimand and an admonishment that you ought not do it again. Sometimes it's a 30-day suspension from the practice of law. Sometimes it's a year or 2 year suspension from the practice of law. But in the most egregious circumstances, the Board of Professional Responsibility will recommend disbarment. That's what they recommended here. And, we can look at some of Donald Trump's other attorneys when there's been an investigation like this, there's been a recommendation of disbarment, and those attorneys, in fact, have been disbarred. People like Rudy Giuliani, who was disbarred not once but twice, once in D.C. and once in New York. So I think the odds are very good that he will end up being disbarred.
Once you've been disbarred, what's the likelihood that you can regain your law license?
Brian, I don't know that any state. So first of all, let me preface this by saying each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, which hopefully someday may become a state, they have their own rules governing, the ins and outs of attorneys, what is required of them, the ethical code of conduct they must abide by, what happens if there are allegations of misconduct. But each state has its own rules with respect to whether anybody can have their law license reinstated or can become licensed to practice law in another state if they've been disbarred in the state where they originally held their law license. So I can't say I'm privy to all 50 states, the rules and regulations, but let me just say my inclination is to say once you have been disbarred by one jurisdiction, there's what we call reciprocity. And basically, you are persona non grata in every jurisdiction, every state, because, nobody wants to have among their licensed attorneys somebody who has been disbarred for unethical conduct in another state.
And so in a normal world, Trump's attorneys who are right now working on his behalf in very much the same way that his first tranche of attorneys and prosecutors worked on his behalf, the Jeffrey Clarks, the John Eastmans, the Rudy Giulianis, the Jen Ellises, and the Sidney Powells, wouldn't that serve as a bit of a deterrent for this new tranche of attorneys and prosecutors to recognize what's on the other end of this thing as they continue to carry out the illegal schemes of Donald Trump?
One would think if somebody cares about their license to practice law, and I don't think you threw Kenneth Chesbro into the mix. He has also been disbarred. He was one of the architects of the fake elector scheme. You would think it would be a cautionary tale for other lawyers, unless they just don't value their law license as much as they value the proximity to power that perhaps they enjoy when they are doing Donald Trump's dirty bidding. And let me just do this, Brian. For the benefit of our viewers, I don't want them to just take my word for it. Let me just read a couple of important sentences. I would call them the money lines from this new finding recommending disbarment of Jeffrey Clark for what he did to try to help Donald Trump steal the election. They say, first of all, on the merits, we conclude that disciplinary counsel, that's who I referred to as the prosecutor, proved by clear and convincing evidence that respondent Jeffrey Clark attempted to make intentionally false statements when he continued to advocate that the Justice Department issue a letter containing falsehoods. Jeffrey Clark's conduct constituted an attempt to make intentionally false statements about the results of the Justice Department's investigation. A majority of the board recommends that Clark be disbarred, and Clark was prepared to cause the Justice Department to tell a lie about the status of its investigation of an important national issue, the integrity of the 2020 presidential elections. If ever we need to take steps to not only punish that, to make sure Clark is specifically deterred and is never in a position to do it again, and to deter others who might be considering doing Donald Trump's dirty bidding, it is in this case.
Glenn, do you have any concern, though, that when these people lose their law license, for example, that not only is that not a disqualifying factor for him and the MAGA movement or the Republican Party more broadly, but in fact, that's something that they look for. They look for a sign that these people can be bought, can be steeped in moral depravity, won't follow the law. I mean, you look at Pam Bondi herself. In 2013, Trump's foundation made a $25,000 donation to a political group that supported Pam Bondi in her capacity as Florida Attorney General, and that was around the same time where they were considering whether or not to join a fraud investigation into Trump University. Ultimately, after receiving that donation, Pam Bondi opted not to pursue that investigation, and yet in New York, that fraud investigation was brought, and they opted to settle in New York. And so, I could make the argument that that's why Pam Bondi is there, because she's willing to show moral flexibility in the eyes of Donald Trump. So is there worry that this isn't, again, this is not only not disqualifying for these people, but in fact, this kind of thing is embraced, it's celebrated in the MAGA movement?
Yeah, Brian, to kind of prove the point that you're making, you know where Jeffrey Clark is presently? He works for Donald Trump's administration in the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. So for all I know, this is something that Jeffrey Clark might highlight on his resume to continue working for the Trump administration, that, hey, look, when I tried to help you steal a presidential election, I got disbarred for it. So doesn't that recommend me for pretty much any job in the Trump administration? I don't even know if that's facetious or to make your point. That's something that Donald Trump values. Somebody
like
is so loyal to him.
Yeah,
somebody is so loyal to him that they're willing to be disbarred to, do Donald Trump's dirty bidding.
Now, to that point, then, is there any way that, clearly Jeffrey Clark would have a vested interest in trying to retain his law license. Presumably he wants to have a job after the Trump administration's over, or he doesn't, for all I know. Maybe maybe there's plenty of opportunities within this MAGA movement that celebrate and in fact look for some formerly gainfully employed and currently disbarred attorney that has shown only loyalty and slavish devotion to Donald Trump. But is there a way for him to appeal in the event that the DC bar finds that he should be disbarred?
Yeah, there is a right to appeal this Board of Professional Responsibility decision and recommendation that he be disbarred. He has 30 days to file a notice of appeal with the DCCA, the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, and they can take the matter up if they choose. But again, when the misconduct is so dramatic, trying to undermine the results of a presidential election, what he tried to do was be part and parcel of Donald Trump's de facto conspiracy agreement to, violate the law in order to undermine the considered votes of the American people. It doesn't really get any more egregious when it comes to attorney misconduct than that.
Glenn, do you have some concern about the DC bar falling into the same trap that so many other entities in American life and political life have fallen victim to? And we've seen how both sidesism has pervaded the media. We've seen how both sidesism has pervaded these law firms. We've seen how both sidesism has pervaded so much of our lives, where all of a sudden it's not so much about objective truth. It's about, okay, let's give equal time to what the right is saying and what the left is saying. And so if the left says 2 + 2 is 4 and the right says 2 + 2 is 27, it's not going to be, oh, the left is correct, because then that would be unfair. That would show their bias. And so we just have to pretend that a feud has erupted and uncertainty abounds with regard to the solution to this math problem. That is what I feel like so much has kind of happened to this country. And so as Trump continues to expand his influence, is there some concern that people who are loyal to Donald Trump and the MAGA movement will pervade the boards that govern the DC bar, and suddenly what Jeffrey Clark did in Washington, D.C. Is no longer as black and white as it is, but rather, okay, if you try to take action against Jeffrey Clark, then you're being a Democrat, and you don't want to do that, do you? And so we just have to kind of fall victim to the same neutrality that we've seen in so many other elements of our life.
Brian, I couldn't be more concerned that Donald Trump and the folks that are loyal to him for whatever reason and willing to violate the law and the Constitution in support of whatever Donald Trump wants to do, they have been infiltrating, damn near every institution of government. We have seen a judge, Emile Bove, who was a former Donald Trump criminal defense attorney, who said, basically he instructed DOJ lawyers that if judges rule in a way that interferes with Donald Trump's deportation priorities, then we're going to have to say to those federal court judges, F you, and defy court orders. Now that person, Emile Bove, will be issuing court orders. It will be interesting to see if he welcomes DOJ lawyers or any lawyers telling him, F you, we're not going to abide by your orders. He's doing it with U.S. attorneys on multiple fronts in multiple jurisdictions where he is sidestepping, that's to put it mildly, the law to put his flunkies in place as the top prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions around the country to do his dirty bidding rather than to do the work of the American people. So could they also infect things like bar council offices, boards of professional responsibility? Oh, hell yes. They can infect every single institution that they are willing to attack because they think those institutions pose a risk to them of maybe exposing and holding accountable Trump and company for their misconduct. So yeah, that is an ongoing concern, and we are seeing it play out in institutions all across government.
Well, look, given what is objectively a grim outlook on that stuff, at least we can take the win where we get it. To see that Jeffrey Clark has been referred for disbarment is objectively a good thing, makes this country stronger. So again, we take what wins we can where we can. If there is any update, for example, when he is ultimately disbarred, or if he opts to appeal, we'll bring that to anybody who's watching right now. So if you'd like to follow along with this and any other legal news, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. It is completely free. It's the best way to support our work, and it's the best way to support independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.